This is Innovation and Leadership, where we interview Navy SEALs, venture capitalists, pro athletes, best-selling authors, Hollywood filmmakers, really as many different kinds of high achievers as we can get to come on the show. Today's episode is going to be from our mini-series that we created with Corporate Alliance, asking top CEOs and executives and entrepreneurs who have had very large exits, specifically about their thoughts on leadership and people. Alex is with us here today. He's the president of Vivint. We've been talking about Vivint Smart Home, if you know Vivint Solar also.
We've certainly had our fair share of failures, and I think we're not a culture that likes to fail at all. So I'm not sure I subscribe to the we celebrate failure. We don't celebrate it. We hate it. But we also are. We understand that if you are innovating and pushing the envelope, that you're probably going to fail sometimes.
Also, I want to talk to you about one of our show's sponsors. I met these guys back on episode 6. CEO Zach Smith was telling me all about starting a skateboard company and how much he hated doing the bookkeeping for a skateboard shop, and how he really got led to start this business, Bookly, that's a hybrid combining bookkeeping software and human services. And I'll tell you why I let him become a sponsor. It's because I use their service now. I don't love paying $50 an hour for bookkeepers to do stuff that I know software could do way, way cheaper. But I don't love bookkeeping at all. So I want a real live human who knows what they're talking about to help me with the stuff I don't understand. Probably the straw that broke the camel's back for me, though, the thing that put me over the top, was that they could do my taxes and payroll also. So totally suggest checking them out. Go to their website, bookly.co, and check out their flat rates. I've been super happy with them. So now on to today's episode. If you missed part 1, you really need to go back and hear about raising money from Goldman Sachs and other folks. But to start this episode off, Alex, I'd love to hear, thinking about someone who sets an example for how to treat other people. You brought up your partner, CEO of Vivint, Todd Peterson. Can you talk about him for a minute?
Todd is a very unique character, certainly in the business landscape, who is he's a little bit of an enigma. I mean, I think people think maybe they kind of know he never what he is like, but many times if they have never met him, he's not anything like what they maybe thought he might be like. He has, in the 12 years I've been here, has never worn a business suit in fact, he never wears more than like jeans and a t-shirt, and typically a hat, to any meeting I've been in. And, we've met with, there's been some very important meetings that typically people would not be wearing, jeans and a t-shirt. But he is one of the most authentic people that I know. And we talked about earlier about being okay with your weaknesses and embracing your strengths. And he has set a tone and a culture here at Vivint Smart Home that allows people to admit, maybe not the right word, but be comfortable in the fact that they don't know everything or they're not good at everything, because he is so open with that about what he's not good at, and comfortable with that. And so there's a culture here where, I've been in other places or situations where it's like you can't, it's like if you show any weakness or perceived weakness, then, you're going to be kind of run over. The truth is we all have weaknesses. We all have our weaknesses and the flat sides or our and we all have strengths. And I think if you focus again more on those strengths, and he has set that tone here by being okay with the fact that there's things he's exceptionally good at, and then there's he has a very short attention span. Meetings, he hates meetings. We're lucky to kind of keep him engaged for 15 minutes. But there's also real strength to that, because it's like you have to kind of get to the point and, not waste a lot of time. So he's been, it's been a real joy being able to build the business with him and learn from him. And And then also see how he is able to really make friends with everybody that he interacts with. I mean, you never forget meeting Todd and how easy it is for him to get to know people, and everywhere we go, he is making friends with the Uber drivers, and we get invited. He served a Mormon mission when he was younger to Dominican Republic. So every time we go to New York, we're being invited over for rice and beans to someone's house because he'll recognize they're from the DR and, start talking to them. And in 10 minutes, they're best friends.
That's right. And in your mind, what is the advantage of having a culture where people don't have to pretend they're well-rounded and know everything?
So I think on the flip side of that, we have a culture where we expect you to be really good at whatever it is that you're responsible for. But I think what it does is it really fosters a lot of trust. Because, look, everybody has insecurities and everybody has weaknesses. And if you're in a culture where you're not really allowed to kind of expose that, then you're kind of you're missing, I think, an element of trust. When you kind of expose all of who you are, and you fit into that team based on all of that, then there's a really high level of trust. And I would say we have an exceptional management team with people from all over the country and a bunch of different industries, who have, in their own right, we probably have 5 or 6 people here that could run the company. And we've been able to get them, and every one of them has said this, that this has been the most unique culture they've ever worked in, because it's more about the team than it is about any of the individuals. And obviously that has to start at the top with Todd. And he will say that he will say, he's not, when we make decisions, we're making those as a team together. Nothing is being dictated. And I think it's led to a tremendous amount of our growth because there's no bottleneck. We've broadened the team, which then has broadened our capacity. And many times entrepreneurs have a really hard time transitioning from small company to a bigger one because you need to give up. It's about, I think, to successfully make that transition, it's about actually giving up control, not maintaining control. And typically an entrepreneur has gotten to where they've gotten to by controlling everything. And Todd has been able to really successfully make that transition. And so part of it is, it's a very strong culture, a lot of trust, and we're okay that different people bring different strengths to the table, which also mean they bring different weaknesses to the table as well.
So let's talk about this. I mean, it sounds like just a lot of deep self-honesty, right? Thinking about large transactions like Vivint Solar going public or the $2 billion transaction with Blackstone. Can you talk about, because those are definitely temptations to put on have a cardboard cutout version of ourselves we want everybody to believe in, and right?
Yes.
Can you talk about what it was like to do those transactions and to be in that space where maybe there can be temptations to maybe not be as honest about all of that?
Yeah, so I think the word we would use for all that is just authenticity. It's like, look, just be who you are, and there's parts of us and parts of what we've accomplished that are amazing, but there's also that we have weaknesses, and there's been lots of failures too, and we're the first to kind of embrace those and talk about them and say, here's what we learned, and we have certainly had our fair share of failures. And I think we're not a culture that likes to fail at all. So, I'm not sure I subscribe to the, hey, we celebrate failure. We don't celebrate it. We hate it. But we also are, we understand that if you are innovating and pushing the envelope, that you're probably going to fail sometimes. And so as long as the reason you're failing is because you're pushing hard and trying to get, to new places, then we're okay with that. If you're failing because you just aren't good at what you do and you keep failing, then you're probably not going to last super long in our culture. With the Blackstone transaction, I mean, truthfully, when I first got here, and put the deal together with Todd and some other partners that were at the business back then that aren't here now, Keith Nellison and Sean Brenchley. When we put the deal together, the original investment thesis was, and the business was valued at like $25 million back then. So that was like 12 years ago. And the original investment thesis was we could build like a $250 million dollar business. And as we got into it, Todd and I were talking to each other, and I distinctly kind of remember. Well, when I told him that, he actually was like, 250 million? Are you crazy? There's no way we can do that. And I'm like, I really think we can. And so then we just started ratcheting it up. After a while, I remember having a conversation with him one night, and he's like, what if we could build like $1 billion business? And I'm like, no, I think you're crazy. I don't think we can do that. And then we started to think about, well, here's what we would have to do. And, and for us, it was never like about the money. It was always about like, well, here's kind of what that would represent. Then it went to, back then it was like we like kind of put this plan together, and we're like, hey, we actually think we could build like a multi-billion-dollar business. And we didn't talk about it much, honestly, with other people, because we knew they would think we were crazy, and it was just easier not to explain it. So we just didn't talk about it. At least externally. We did internally. And I think the way that you kind of get to those kinds of results is really mostly about focusing on the inputs. And what we did is we said, hey, here's maybe where we want to try and get to. So that $2 billion number. So then we said, okay, what kind of company would we have to build in order to accomplish that? And then we didn't forget about the $2 billion, but if we talked about the $2 billion, it was more representation of what we would have to do every day in order to build the kind of company that would be worth that much. And so it was more about the inputs. And so then we just went and started focusing every day on, okay, here's what we need to do today. We had a broad strategy that was guiding those daily decisions. But, the strategy, honestly, it was, if you probably took all of the combined hours that was spent on developing the strategy, it might be like 72 hours. The strategy wasn't that hard to figure out. It was more about the execution of that strategy. And we spent, every day kind of executing on it. So we just kind of were doing that. The interesting thing was there were times during that we were like, hey, we're on the path, we're doing this, we're going to accomplish our goals. And there were times where it felt like we were worth nothing. And in fact, a year before we sold for $2 billion, we had some issues with a credit facility, and we had some covenants on that credit facility that we were getting very close to. And if you never ever want to trip a covenant in a credit facility, because then the bank essentially controls your company. And we were managing these covenants like on a daily basis. Well, not even daily, like hourly basis, to make sure we were not tripping them. And it was temporary. We knew that over the course of 12 months, we would like get back to normalized. We had ordered too much. We had predicted a certain number of installs. We had ordered too much inventory. And then on top of the inventory, we had ordered too much of a cushion for the inventory. So we had a bunch of inventory sitting in the warehouse, and it wasn't turning into recurring revenue for customers. And because of that, it was getting very close. And all we had to do was use that inventory in like 6 months from now to generate customers, and we'd be fine again. But it was as close to, a life-threatening kind of in terms of business, life or death situation I've ever been in, and was very, very stressful. And I remember, having conversations with Todd late at night, like, I mean, I would have been happy to take $100,000 out of this thing, and obviously, a year later we sold the business for $2 billion. And so, there, in my experience, there's no such thing as up and to the right in a straight line. It just doesn't. It doesn't happen that way. There's at least, and maybe other people have experienced this, but differently. But my experience in all the businesses I've done is lots of ups and downs. There's near-death experiences. And if you're focused, though, on the right things every day, and then you're sometimes just fighting to survive, maybe the only input is I'm just going to make sure that we don't go bankrupt today, and, you get through the day. If you do that well enough and you have a good strategy and some luck, I mean, I for sure think that, we're lucky. I'd like to say that, we had foresight in picking smart home as a strategy and all this stuff. And I think there was some of that there, but I also think some of it was just luck. But we tried to do everything that we could control. And then we got to a place where all of a sudden, we had Blackstone wanting to buy our business for $2 billion. And honestly, it was surreal. My wife was like, what? She knows me. So she's like, how did you do that? And I'm like, well, I didn't. There was a whole team of people, and it just didn't, we had been so focused on the inputs. We kind of, it wasn't fast. It took time. It was hard. We had near-death experiences. And then once you got there, you were like, wow, I can't, you look back at what you had accomplished and it was pretty amazing, but it didn't feel amazing. Well, it just felt like, you're just going to work and doing what you needed to do every day. And so I'm a big believer in making sure if your inputs are the right inputs, and you really just focus on those, and then you pivot, you have to respond to what's going on and change. But if you're doing the right inputs, you'll get the outcome that you want to get almost every time. What you can't control is when that outcome will happen. Sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it's shorter. And I think much of the angst comes in businesses and entrepreneurs and startups where it's like, okay, I have to do this, and I have to do this in the next 12 months. And I've been in that situation a lot. So sometimes that's just the reality. But if I had to give advice, I would say if you can give yourself as much runway and as much time as possible to get to your goal, because if you do if you're focused on the right inputs, you will get to your outcome.
And give us some examples of inputs for people who may not know exactly what you mean there.
Yeah, I think it's different for different businesses, but for us, there was a few metrics that really mattered. Obviously, acquiring new customers is like a really important input for any business. And many times I think, we see a lot of these companies that get venture capital and they're focused on the product and this and that. And it's like, well, how are you going to create customers? And they're just going to come beat our door down. Typically, that's not how most businesses. There's a few social media companies that I think have been able to create that, but typically you're having to create customers. It doesn't just happen spontaneously. So focused on, well, what are we doing to create customers? What channels are we developing? How is that working? Finding kind of a winning strategy and then really doubling down on that. So that was really important. Our cost of creating a customer was another input that we focused on every day. Attrition. So once you got a customer, once you got a customer and you knew, how much it cost, well, what's the life cycle of a customer once they come in? What were our service costs? So that was another really important input that we focused on every single day. And so really for our business, it's like, that was it. If we focused on creating customers at a good creation cost and have a, low attrition, and our servicing cost was good. And then what was the ARPU per customer? If I manage those 5 things, that's 5 or 4, if I manage those things, then we were going to get a good outcome. And so when things got super complicated or hard, or it's like you just go back and say, look, these are the things that matter in our business. And I fell into the trap early on in my first company and my first two, where you could come in and spend all day on stuff and feel like, wow, I knocked off 100 things on my list. And then I'd look and say, I don't think I created any value for my business today. I like put in, the phone system got installed and this happened and I fixed this, I did this HR issue, and those things need to happen. But many times as an entrepreneur, you can kind of, I think, mistake movement for progress. And so that's why it's so important to identify, well, what are the inputs that are going to make my business valuable? And I should be making sure I'm doing those and excluding the ones that maybe aren't going to contribute to that value. So for me, for our business, those were the inputs. And the funny thing is, those are still our inputs that we're focused on. There's a lot of things that flow from that. So it's not, our servicing cost can be broken down into 100 other things. And we do that and have that detail, but it all flows up to, hey, what's our, what is it? Are we creating customers? What's it costing us to create customers? What's our ARPU? What's the average attrition? And then what's the servicing cost? And then I can know by looking at those metrics if we're growing and creating value as a business or we're not. And I have reports that I look at every day, and we still actually are just doing that. And I think we're still creating a tremendous amount of value for the business. And there's ups and downs that you go through in that, but those are the inputs that matter to our business.
And just quickly before I ask this next question, what was the solar transaction? What were the numbers on that when you?
Well, solar has been an interesting up and down ride for us. We love our solar business, and so we incubated that and spun it out. We took it public. For, I think it was close to $2 billion, or it was $1.5 billion to $2 billion. We then actually sold that business to a company called SunEdison, and we sold it for 2.1 or 2.2 billion. And so we signed on the deal. And typically when you do, SunEdison was a publicly traded company. Typically from signing a deal to closing is 6 to 12 months, depending on regulatory approvals and financing in place and all that stuff. But when you've signed a deal, you've sold the business. And in fact, we had sold the business, and SunEdison was essentially running it. We were running it, but we couldn't actually make any changes to the business unless they approved. So they owned the business. They hadn't given us the money yet. So from the time that we signed to the time we closed, when we signed SunEdison, and they had like 3 companies that were in kind of an umbrella of companies that were all together. I think had something like a $15 billion market cap. And when we were supposed to sign, they had a $500 million market cap, and they actually went bankrupt. And so we backed out of that deal, obviously, before they went bankrupt. We backed out, and then the stock price of the solar business tanked because both of industry factors, and we backed out of this deal that valued the business at over $2 billion. So then Vivint Solar was a few $100 million dollars, and we're now kind of building that business back up. Its stock price is, this year grown by I think like 75%. So it's we're starting to build it back up, but that's been a really interesting ride. And the CEO over there, David Bywater, now was the COO at Smart Home Business. We're working closely together. There's kind of a common ownership structure in the non-public equity, and so the truth is that Todd and I's vision of Smart Home includes energy. It's a big part of it, and so we always wanted the customer to be able to have a smart home, and we think a part of Smart Home is both energy production and energy management. And so solar kind of fits into that broader vision. but is a standalone company and kind of runs on its own. And we have a really good relationship and partnership between the companies.
That's great. Well, kind of closing off here on part 2 of the episode of the interview. I was thinking about what you were saying about, you spent 72 hours really on the strategy, and then you did the right inputs long enough.
Yeah.
Right. And, we had John Pastana on the show a week ago, and, he's part of the Omniture guys that sold to Adobe for the $1.8 billion, right?
Yeah.
And he said a similar thing in a way. He said, you got to start with a business that could become $1 billion business. He's like, when I was looking through the ideas, I wasn't interested in anything that didn't have a realistic model that could be at least 100 million in revenue.
Yep.
Right. And that was his starting point. And then you had to go do the right things.
Yeah.
Right. Any advice for someone else out there who's thinking, okay, what are the things I need to ask myself of, is this legitimately something that can be $1 billion business or could do 100 million in revenue plus or something?
So I actually would agree 100% with what he says. I think that's right. I do think that there's a lot of very valuable businesses that have been created from businesses that I don't think started out as companies that had a clear path to $1 billion. We're one of those companies.
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, you guys, starting off as a 25, and then should we be 250,
well,
and then you had
Todd,
to make those
Todd
decisions.
really had started that way before that, and he started selling pest control door to door is what the origins of our company are, and that certainly wasn't. I don't think I'd look at that and say, hey, that's a multi-billion-dollar business you got there, and so, but I don't think that contradicts what John says. I think. Maybe had, if Todd had sat down and said, hey, I'm starting, his kind of just happened. And so if Todd had sat down and said, hey, I'm starting something, he maybe wouldn't have started the way he did. So what I would say is that I think execution leads to a lot of opportunity. So if you execute well, we've pivoted and changed our business, 5 or 6 times. And that's what's allowed us to get to where we're at. So that kind of successful execution. So if you can start by saying, hey, here's a business that has a clear path to $100 million and you can execute well, then it will take a lot less time than it took us to get to where you're at, which it did for those guys.
And again, whether it's at the start or whether it's 10 years in that somebody's making the decision, I want to have $1 billion business.
Yeah.
Okay, what's it going to take to have because I think that's such a logical chain, right, of what's it going to take to have a company that could produce that.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts on how to fact check ourselves? How do we, because there's the bozos who are telling you nothing will work. There's the dreamers that think everything can work.
Yeah.
Any tips for, I got to be honest with myself. I got to have enough confidence to try something that hasn't been done maybe, but I got to have enough reality that I'm not barking up the wrong tree. That navigating that subtlety.
Yeah, no, I actually think a lot about this because I have a lot of people come and tell me stuff, and I'm like, I don't know if I should encourage them to, chase that dream because I'm not sure it's going to work. But, I could be wrong too, and I'll tell people that. And so I think the advice that I would give is you should listen to not the people who think everything's going to work. You should listen to the people who think nothing's going to work and understand exactly why they think it's not going to work, and list it all out. So here are the 25 reasons, and go talk to 10 people. And, usually you'll start to build a consensus like, okay, here are the reasons why this isn't going to work. And then you better have a good path or reason why you think you can make those 25 things work, right? It can't just be, well, I'm really good, so I'm gonna make that work. It's like here are the 25 reasons why they think it's not gonna work, and here's how I'm gonna overcome those 25 reasons. So I would say, don't fight the naysayers. Like, prove them wrong. And you don't prove a naysayer wrong by just trying to not talk about the problems. Just say, well, this is just going to be great. It's going to be great, right? And going through that exercise is actually really valuable for any entrepreneur, because the people who are probably telling you, hey, here's why you can. If someone just says, I think it's stupid, and they can't articulate it or can't articulate what they think the problems are, then maybe they're stupid. But if you have a successful, person that's invested or business person that can say, hey, here are the 5 things that I think are the reasons why I wouldn't invest, or the 5 things. So all those no's that I got early with Apex, I listened to everything they said. I actually understood what they were saying. I just disagreed. I actually agreed with them, but I felt like I had a way to mitigate those risks, and that I could successfully kind of transition the business into a full service company. And so it wasn't them being negative and me being positive, and the two weren't connected. It was like I wasn't listening to the negative stuff, and I was just saying, hey, this is going to work because I just feel it in my bones. I was saying, hey, I understand why you think it's not going to work. Here's my plan to kind of mitigate those risks, and I feel confident in my ability to execute on that plan. And so my advice would be don't listen to the people who think you're going to be successful. Listen to the ones who think you're going to fail and understand why. And then if you have a credible plan, and now it just comes down to like a difference of opinion, like, well, I think, you won't build a call center that does this, or you won't, and you're saying, nope, I will, then that's different than saying, I don't have any idea what I'm supposed to do, but I just feel in my bones that I'm supposed to do it. It's like, well, that I wouldn't, that person's going to fail, because it's likely that all of the problems that those intelligent people are bringing up are problems you're actually going to have to deal with in building the business. And so if you know that early and you have a plan to get through those problems, you're increasing your chances of success by a lot. And so that's probably how I would say, listen to you don't have to agree. And maybe, well, for me, I actually agree. Anybody who said, here's why I'm not investing, I'd say to them, I probably agree with you. Like, I totally understand why, the company hasn't kept customers yet. And they were all actually like logical, good reasons why they shouldn't invest. And then I left and said, I have a plan to get around those, and I'm going to make these people regret the day that they didn't invest in me. And they all did. So
that is the best place to end the episode right there. Appreciate all the time you've given us here today.
All right. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Well, that's it for the episode. One other thing I wanted to tell you about, if you remember the guys from Convoy in episodes back, Ken Free and Trent Mano, I went on one of their CEO trips to New York, and I met a guy named Brent Thompson, very successful entrepreneur. He was former CEO of Jive Communications, big company now, I think $300 or $400 million. Anyways, he started a new company called blipbillboards.com. I'm super stoked they're a sponsor now. But I remember a year and some ago when I met him, I thought it was genius. Instead of having to buy 6 months or a year's worth of billboard for thousands of dollars, you can buy 8 seconds at a time for like 10 or 20 cents. You pick what billboard you want it on, what time of day you want it to run, and it just puts so much power in the hands of marketers and CEOs who want to try something and see if it works. You can buy as many or as few as you want, change it as many times as you want. I think now our podcast is being advertised on billboards in like 18 different states because we have these guys as sponsors. We're pretty excited about it. Hope you check out blipbillboards.com. Thanks.